Manila International Airport pulsed like a living artery that July morning. People moved in hurried currents, carrying luggage and hopes in unequal proportions. The air conditioning fought against the tropical heat that insisted on invading the hall through automatic doors that never stopped opening and closing. In the immigration line, a small figure stood out for his quietness. Juanito Macareg, only 8 years old, clutched a crumpled envelope and a faded photograph against his chest. His eyes, large and moist like water wells after the rain, scanned the environment with a mixture of fascination and terror. It was his first trip alone. His worn school uniform and patched shoes contrasted violently with the business attire and designer luggage that predominated in that area of the airport. His black hair, cut irregularly, seemed to have been hastily trimmed by inexperienced hands. The tag hanging around his neck identified him as an unaccompanied minor. Behind the control counter, employee Eduardo Villanueva rolled his eyes while checking the child's documentation. His face contorted into a mask of barely disguised disdain. The consular seal, maternal authorization, contact information for the aunt waiting for him in Bacolod. Everything seemed insufficient to satisfy his need to impose authority. In the same area, discreetly, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle walked toward the boarding gate for a conference in Cebu. Dressed simply, without the vestments that would betray his position, he was just another passenger among many. Few noticed his presence, but his compassionate eyes did not fail to register the small daily injustices that went unnoticed by most. Eduardo's voice gradually rose, acquiring a theatrical tone that attracted curious glances. His words struck the air like stones thrown at a defenseless target. He repeated the information from Juanito's form with an exaggeratedly caricatured pronunciation, mocking the name of the child's small village of origin, Barangay Matabangke. Juanito's face reddened under his brown skin, red patches rising up his neck like a silent fire. His shoulders curved even more, as if trying to disappear inside his own body. The envelope in his hands trembled slightly, while drops of sweat ran down his furrowed forehead. Other immigration officers exchanged ambiguous glances, some uncomfortable, others amused. Nobody intervened. A small circle of involuntary spectators formed around the counter, some passengers averting their eyes in embarrassment, others observing with the cruel indifference of those accustomed to witnessing the suffering of others. Cardinal Tagle stopped his walking. Something in the scene captured his attention with the force of a calling. His eyes, always attentive to manifestations of human pain, fixed on the small hunched figure. The contrast between the child's fragility and the adult's arrogance was an image that crystallized so many of the injustices he fought daily. In Juanito's hand, the envelope contained more than documents. It held a letter written with difficulty by his mother, a domestic worker in Singapore who hadn't seen her son in 3 years. In the pocket of his uniform shirt, a simple wooden rosary, a gift from his grandmother before she passed away, seemed to weigh like lead against his racing heart. Eduardo Villanueva continued his theater of cruelty. Now he pointed to the form filled out by hand by Juanito's mother, highlighting grammatical errors with sadistic pleasure. His index finger struck the paper repeatedly, as if each blow could deepen the humiliation. The line behind the boy grew, but the employee seemed indifferent to the time he was wasting. Some tears finally escaped from little Juanito's eyes, tracing bright paths down his cheeks. He quickly dried them with the sleeve of his uniform, leaving a dark stain on the faded blue fabric. His lips moved in silence, perhaps a prayer taught by his grandmother, perhaps just the mute effort to hold back crying. Cardinal Tagle observed every detail of that painful scene. His gaze was not merely that of a witness, but of someone who absorbs the suffering of others as his own. In his years of ministry in the outskirts of Manila, he had learned to recognize the many faces of wounded dignity. The abuse of power, even on a microscopic scale like that one, was a wound in the social body that he could not ignore. The folder the Cardinal carried contained important documents for the conference on migration and human rights that would take place in Cebu. Ironically, that small drama at the airport precisely encapsulated the themes he would discuss in a few hours. Theory and practice united before his eyes with a synchronicity that seemed orchestrated by invisible hands. The surrounding environment continued its frenetic rhythm, but for the Cardinal time seemed to slow down. A silent decision was taking shape in his heart, crystalline as spring water. It was not just the religious man who moved now, but the man who had grown up in humble conditions, the boy who once also felt the weight of the condescending gaze of the powerful. With slow and deliberate steps, Cardinal Tagle deviated from his original route. His discreet figure moved among the passengers like a boat navigating against the current. There was no hurry in his movements, only serene determination. Some people recognized him along the way, looks of surprise and reverence following his passage. The employee Eduardo continued his performance, now holding the boy's passport at an exaggerated distance, as if the document might contain some contamination. His sarcastic smile revealed coffee-stained teeth. The involuntary audience had grown, some passengers discreetly filming with their cell phones, others whispering about the inappropriateness of that behavior. Juanito remained motionless, like a small statue of shame and resignation. His eyes fixed on an invisible point on the floor, while his fingers squeezed the envelope so tightly that his knuckles were white. Time seemed to drag on infinitely for the boy, each second of humiliation stretching like elastic. The Cardinal reached the counter without announcement or fanfare. His presence, however, radiated a silent authority that made Eduardo interrupt his speech in the middle of a word. The employee recognized him immediately, the familiar face from newspapers, televised masses, charity events. A different blush, not of childish shame, but of adult embarrassment, rose up the man's neck. In the small crowd that had formed, a whisper of recognition spread like a breeze. "It's Cardinal Tagle," passed from mouth to mouth, as cell phones were raised to record the moment. The atmosphere changed instantly, now charged with expectation. What would the religious man known for his gentleness, but also for his firmness in the face of injustice, do? The Cardinal did not speak immediately. His eyes passed from the employee to Juanito with a tranquility that contrasted with the tension in the environment. Then, in a movement that no one expected, he knelt down to be at the boy's height. His knees touched the cold floor of the airport without hesitation, while his hand gently rested on the child's trembling shoulder. Eduardo Villanueva froze behind the counter, his mouth half open in an unspoken word. The badge on his chest rose and fell rapidly, accompanying his accelerated breathing. The scornful smile had completely disappeared, replaced by an expression of shock and growing discomfort. His colleagues watched the scene with wide eyes. Juanito slowly raised his gaze, meeting the Cardinal's serene face. There was no recognition in the boy's eyes, only confusion and a hesitant spark of hope. The crumpled envelope in his small hands contained not just documents, but dreams and sacrifices of a family separated by economic necessity, a reality all too common in the Philippines. With a gesture of profound simplicity, Cardinal Tagle took the boy's passport from the employee's hand and gave it to Juanito with reverence, like someone returning something sacred. Then, in another surprising movement, he opened his own folder and removed a small book, a collection of Filipino stories he carried to read during the flight, and offered it to the child. The silence that settled was almost palpable. Conversations ceased, steps slowed. Even the airport announcements seemed to have paused momentarily. Cell phones captured the moment, but no one dared to break that bubble of restored dignity that had formed around the religious man and the child. The Cardinal finally stood up, his simple cassock marked by dust from the airport floor. His eyes now directed straight at Eduardo, not with anger or accusation, but with a compassionate intensity that seemed to see beyond the surface. He spoke a few words in a low voice, audible only to the employee and Juanito, words that didn't need to be heard by others for their effect to be understood. Eduardo Villanueva underwent a visible metamorphosis. His arrogant posture melted like wax under the strong sun, shoulders dropping, eyes lowering, restless hands on the computer keyboard. The blush on his face was now complete, extending to his ears. He nodded several times, quick and nervous head movements. Juanito held the book against his chest, along with his other treasures. His eyes, previously filled with humiliation, now shone with a different light. The boy wasn't smiling. The recent trauma was still too close, but his posture had changed. His shoulders were more erect, his head higher, like a plant that finally finds support after a storm. Around them, spectators remained in reverent silence. Many had lowered their cell phones, feeling that continuing to film would somehow profane the sanctity of the moment. Some wiped discreet tears, others nodded in silent approval. An elderly lady made the sign of the cross, whispering a prayer of gratitude. With sudden efficiency, Eduardo completed the processing of Juanito's documents. His movements were now respectful, almost solemn. He stamped the form carefully, organized the papers in order, and returned them with a reverence that minutes before would have been unimaginable. The line behind the boy began to move again, but at a different rhythm, as if everyone carried with them the silent lesson they had just witnessed. The news spread through the airport like wildfire in dry straw. Airline staff approached Juanito, offering special assistance to his final destination in Bacolod. A flight attendant brought a snack for the boy, while another helped accommodate his small backpack. The VIP treatment didn't come from an official instruction, but from hearts touched by dignity restored through a simple gesture. Cardinal Tagle resumed his path toward the boarding gate, but now it was impossible to go unnoticed. People approached to greet him, some asking for blessings, others simply wanting to shake his hand. He attended to everyone with the same patient kindness, without rush or impatience. His flight to Cebu would wait as long as necessary. On the cell phones of those present, the scene was already traveling beyond the walls of the airport. Shared first in family WhatsApp groups, then on Facebook pages, it would soon reach the evening news. Not for the words spoken, which no one but those directly involved had heard, but for the eloquence of the image. A cardinal kneeling before a poor child, returning to him the dignity that had been stolen. Eduardo Villanueva remained at his post, but something had fundamentally changed. His gaze now met that of each passenger he served. His hands, previously impatient and rough, moved with a new delicacy when handling documents. The transformation was subtle, but undeniable, like music that changes tone and alters the entire atmosphere. In the staff room, during the shift change, the story would be told and retold. In the weeks that followed, supervisors would notice a change in the service at the immigration sector. Small gestures of courtesy would multiply, especially in the treatment given to unaccompanied children and vulnerable travelers. A stone thrown into a lake creates waves that expand far beyond the point of impact. Months later, in the small classroom in Barangay Matabangke, teacher Maria Santos carefully leafed through the book of Filipino stories. The pages were already marked by constant use, some folded at the corners, others with small pencil annotations in the margins. On the first page, a simple handwritten dedication by Cardinal Tagle, "For Juanito, who carries our culture and our hope." The book had become a shared treasure. Each week, a different student would take it home, returning it with a new drawing or reflection on the stories read. The tradition had begun with Juanito, who had insisted that the gift was too valuable to be kept only for himself. Generosity, as he had discovered, could be multiplied. At immigration headquarters in Manila, a framed photograph had been discreetly placed on the bulletin board. It captured the exact moment when the cardinal knelt before Juanito. There was no caption or explanation. None were needed. The image had become a silent reminder of the greater purpose behind each stamp, each document verification, each interaction with travelers. Eduardo Villanueva had been transferred, at his own request, to the assistance program for unaccompanied minors at the airport. His new job was to ensure that children like Juanito had a safe and dignified experience during their passage through Manila. The employee rarely spoke about the incident that had changed his life, but carried the lesson in every gesture, in every kind word, in every genuine smile offered to the young travelers. In the Vatican, in a simple folder on the Pope's desk, rested a clipping from a Filipino newspaper. The headline simply said, "The silence that teaches more than 1,000 sermons." Below, the photograph captured not just a moment, but an essence, that precise instant when compassion bends its knees to elevate another. The clipping had no annotations or comments. Like the gesture it documented, its eloquence was in the silence that speaks directly to the heart. If you enjoyed this story, leave your like and subscribe to our channel.